and your co-hosts are Jason and Ronald here. Please be mindful of the COVID regulations and keep your mask on if you like. Also silence your phone during the session. The session is currently streaming via Zoom and will be recorded. It will be online in a few weeks. Today we have our guest, George Mansoor, and he will be talking about moving ERP data to AWS at scale. One key takeaway from today's session will be you will get to know the creative uses of AWS services. George is a higher education technology leader at the California State University. The CSU has 23 campuses and the Chancellor's office with 43,000 faculty and staff, 412,000 students, and it is the largest public university in the United States. Leadership responsibilities include strategic and operational services for system-wide administrative systems and system-wide data ops and reporting systems. George is fine if you want to interrupt him throughout the session for questions. Without further ado, I'll hand this over to the speaker. Thanks for being here, George.
All right, thank you. And sorry for being late. So as I'm George Mansoor from the Cal State University system, Chief Information Systems Officer. So if you do know Sabash works in my team. I've got 3 major teams, ERP support systems, integration system services, and then our data ops with Sabash, and we're super excited about that. Let's see here, excuse me. So kind of why we're here, we're just talking about how we started our journey in terms of looking at data, and we'll talk about why we want to look at data. It's very important for us to understand why we're doing things, because we need to, yes, we need to modernize, but we need to do so in a cost-effective way, always focusing on the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. Our big focus right now at the California State University system, and what puts all of our projects into clarity, is our graduation initiative focused around student success. It's there to, we're focused on reducing time to degree, improving retention times, and so forth. So I always start this, no matter what we're trying to do, all of our projects, how does it affect this? If it affects this, we want to make sure that we're doing so in an effective way, keeping costs in mind. It's going to be it's a big thing for the CSU. We always talk about costs. We can't throw a whole lot of money around it. Operational things that don't necessarily touch this, that might be be further removed from the student experience and the student success objectives. We're strictly focused on cost optimization. Covered it a little bit, who we are. California State University system. We're not the UCs, we're the 23 other schools, the state colleges throughout the state. We have closer to 500,000 students now, and closer to 56,000 staff and faculty. The COVID was actually a pretty good enrollment boom for us in many ways. Some of the challenges of getting into our ERP system. Our ERP systems are Oracle PeopleSoft systems that you're aware of, if you're familiar with those systems. Largely a legacy system. 20 years of data, a lot of stuff's in there, pretty big data sets. But we're pretty confident that the data that sits in those systems can help us understand how to improve some of the outcomes we're focusing around in terms of student success. So we were looking at trying to figure out how to modernize how we look at data. It wasn't meeting our objective. Our data analysis today occurs at these particular points in the term, the things that we call the census data, the term. It's probably too early to get any kind of real insight as to where a student's going, and probably not, too late to even understand and do anything proactive with that data, but it doesn't help us trend that data. So we're looking at how we can modernize that data. We understood that the data capabilities of the cloud in our, were enhanced, greater capabilities of what we have on-prem with traditional data warehouse and so forth. So we just want to get that data over there. So this is kind of what we wanted to look, what we set out trying to think about doing. We've got a bunch of data that sits on-prem. Magically, we want to get it over to AWS, into a bunch of, S3 buckets, our data lake. And then we wanted to take that data, do stuff to it, and then turn it into better data models for reporting purposes. And these are some of the things that are important to us: students by term, and so forth. So this is kind of what we wanted to hit. Real quick, what our two data lakes are that we talked about. We have this concept of a cloud-ready data lake. We call our CMS data lake, which aligns to our common management systems and so forth. It's just our raw data lake, just our mostly structured today. We're starting to put in some unstructured data in there as well. Data in an Apache Parquet format. And the important thing that we wanted to do with our data lake is get that data daily, so that we can start to analyze it. And that's all that is, and that's all we're going to talk about today. Missed the title here. Sabash is responsible for this part of it, and that's what he's working on. So you can talk to him all about this. He takes that data, and he and his team then builds those data models, that support our data analysts in our student affairs systems and so forth. So this is, he'll talk about this, and maybe next year you can bug him to actually present. So today I'm going to focus on just how we got that data into AWS. And it was a pretty big problem for us. We've got 47 production instances. It's about a terabyte or so, about 5 billion records that we wanted to go get on a daily basis, that we thought was interesting data that would be useful in these data models that we're building. It's all an Oracle database. I don't know if you guys work with Oracle databases. They're great for transaction processing, not so great for any sort of analytics, not so great, as it turns out, to get data out of it in a kind of an efficient way and that sort of thing. Additionally, Oracle PeopleSoft, it's a legacy data architecture. It's really optimized for OLTP stuff. It doesn't take into account anything about transactional type of processing, so you can start looking at the data over time. So that was our first big challenge. How do we get the data out there? We tried a bunch of stuff. We tried some AWS native tools for data extraction. Python, through Python, processes, exporting data through Panda data sets and so forth. Other ETL tools, either from Oracle, like ODI, can't even think of what else, but we tried a bunch of things and churned through this, and none of them met our requirements. They didn't perform well enough. We couldn't get the data out on a daily basis in a timely way, or were just prohibitively expensive. So we took a look around and realized that we probably had the answer all along. We use a data virtualization platform from a company called Delphix to provision our development instances. It allows us to quickly provision instances, and we use them for development, for testing, and those sorts of things. So if you aren't familiar with data virtualization, just like any virtualization, it creates pointers and so forth. So it looks and acts and feels like an Oracle database, but it's not a full stack Oracle database. So we looked at that and said, well, why don't we just use this data virtualization technology that we have, this platform, to jump that data over into AWS. We essentially set up this architecture here that works extremely well. So we brought Delphix in for backup and recovery and for development environment provisioning. We ended up using it as a way for us to stream our data effectively into AWS on a daily basis. So this works well. We do this on a regular basis. It's efficient. For us, it was cost effective because we already had this technology in place. It was a core part of our architecture already. We knew how to operate it. Some of the nice things it has, and I'll touch on it later, it allows us also to profile our data. profile our data specifically around our information security policies. That's kind of a big deal for us. So we understand the data, where specific type of data elements might exist, SSNs, bank numbers, those things that we think are confidential. So that was the first thing, just get that data over there. Now it's theoretically a simple process, and I'll share you because I spare a bunch of churn there. We ended up going back to some AWS native services, and we started to look at this data migration service. And if you're familiar with this data migration service, AWS provides it as a way to migrate databases into AWS with the intent of then operating that database in AWS going forward. It's kind of a one-way migration tool. It allows you to migrate a database, theoretically from on-prem to one of the AWS services, RDS or any of the RDS services or whatever. That's the intent of that tool. We found that it was actually a pretty effective tool to help us get our data out of our Oracle databases now that they're already there and into S3 buckets. So we configured this process, data migration services, and we run it now operationally daily. So it kind of starts to look like this now. We've got our on-prem instances, Oracle instances. They're replicated on top of a data virtualization platform with this Delphix product. We stand them up, we run DMS against them, and DMS, the AWS Data Migration Service, extracts that data, dumps it into the S3 bucket, and we're happy. So it ended up being pretty simple. Took us a big churn to get there, but just to kind of highlight, the individual steps now that we do. Nightly we get a list of tables, that our data analysts are interested in. They submit them through a process. We get them. We analyze that table set. We generate the configuration files. Pretty straightforward. We also then, by analyzing our data policies, our data profiles, we can configure DMS to exclude certain. We didn't want to do a whole lot of transformations in getting our data out of our ERP systems into the data lake. The only exception was we did want to exclude sensitive data. We don't want to put a whole lot of sensitive data. We didn't feel that there was any interest or value in that data into our data lakes. And for us right now, that's social security number and banking information. But we can do that simple transformation through the same process. After that, it's pretty straightforward. We've got an automation tool. We're using Morpheus. There's a number of them out there. We're using Ansible, whatever. That'll just start to play a job. Our job retrieves that configuration file that we generate on a daily basis, stands up the EC2 resources required to perform the DMS steps. Our data Delphix, our Delphix platform is suspended. We kind of freeze it at a specific point in time that we coordinate with our stakeholders. And that's important. They felt that they wanted some level of assurance that the data that we have for that day is data that's through X time, right? And so, ironically, our day ends at 1 a.m. the following day. So we did that. So that's what they wanted. That's what we did. We suspended there, perform our data extracts. Our data extracts complete in about 2 hours for those, 5 billion records across the system. They're running in parallel, and as they complete, we publish messages out there to a notification service that processes that Bosch are running will read and pick up, and they can kick off their steps in the pipeline and continue on. We then shut resources down and resume our Delphix virtualization. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple, kind of high level. Just wanted to walk that through, and I think that's about it. Any questions, thoughts, or comments? Now I didn't bring it with us here, but if you want to reach out, we've got these, if you're in higher ed, if you're in the higher ed community, we share a lot. If you're in higher ed, we're willing to share our AWS Cloud Formation templates, our processes that build and run these jobs and so forth. So I don't know where all of you are from, if you're within the higher ed community or not. We're certainly willing to share. Yeah. For right now, we're staying on Oracle on-prem for our ERP systems. That's right now it's probably a financial decision. We've got some capital investment in that hardware. We're just going to write it out. Our development environment has now, with the success here that we were able to get our virtualization platform to get development databases into AWS quickly and easily. We've now done that for our development environment, for our development instances. So now those instances are on their way there. We'll be complete. We'll have finished migrating all the instances by the end of this month. Production, we'll keep it for a while, but that's a financial decision right now at this point.
Why not point DMS directly?
Yeah, so we did that, and it was terribly slow. It didn't work. It was taking days to complete, and then we went through the path, and so our data center is actually in a facility. Is it an Equinix data center facility, which colos with some AWS sites. We went through and got a direct connect into AWS, thinking that's going to solve the problem. That did not solve the problem. It helped somewhat, but at the scale of data that we had, it didn't work. Specifically for our student data, our HR data was okay-ish, but that's why we went down this path.
So I'm a product calculator. Thank you. Question.
I did that.
So you kind of talked about sensitive data.
Yeah.
But we also had, let's say, medical health there on campus. There's the police arm that's also capturing a whole bunch of sensitive data.
Yeah.
And that data, needs to be somewhat protected. So what was the strategy around protecting some of that sensitive data?
So the question here was, what's the strategy about protecting some of the sensitive data, like policing data, medical record data, and so forth? Right now, our strategy is don't touch that data, don't put it into the data lake. So if you want to know the honest answer, we're not certain. So we're not looking at that. Again, our focus is on data that we think will help us target student success outcomes. I don't think, no one around here thinks that policing data does or medical record data does. If they do, if our data analysts think that they want to, we'll have to think about that, right? We'll have to think about how we can bring that data in.
Right, because from a medical standpoint, someone might have some medical needs to sustain in class or to get through the day or get to class, get back home. So as far as enabling and sustaining your students and helping them achieve, I would think that please.
Yeah, I think so too. So, but we're not there in our data analysis yet. The folks are looking at this and you're going to say, hey, our model is X% accurate, right? And we want to get it better. What else do we do? So that's kind of where we are right now. And so Bosch can talk a little bit more about that, but that's kind of where I don't think it's here. I'm pointing, it's somewhere out there, but that's kind of where we are now. We're working with other folks around that same effort. If they want to improve that accuracy and think that data set's important, I think you're right. I also think like food service data, might be interesting for us to take a look at. Are they a commuter, yes or no? And if so, what are traffic patterns look like during those days? So there's a lot of stuff, but we're like just kind of starting out on that route.
Thank you.
Hmm?
I see that last slide again.
This one here?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is just tasks in an automated job stream. Our automation platform, our cloud automation platform happens to be Morpheus. But there's a number of tools. For us, we tried to, we'd go AWS native for certain things, but some things we kind of wanted to be cloud agnostic. The reason is we do have some of our campus are AWS, some of our campus is on Azure and so forth. So we want to be able to support all those campuses, and we think by having certain things kind of be somewhat agnostic, that might help. So
this looks a lot of greenfield. So how are you able to, is it in a sense of like your stakeholders with the reporting and the information they have today, how did you validate and reconcile that your processes were correct back to those as you move forward?
So that really comes as we pick up this data. So this data is the data, right? So the raw data extract. Now, as we take that data and turn it into those data models for reporting, that's kind of that next step. We have other accepted reporting processes that we can reconcile them against. So
How do you plan to do that
by looking at those by looking at the same data. So there's system-wide reporting that puts students into buckets and those sorts of things. We're going to do the same thing over here on those data sets and show that they reconcile. That's the plan. That's a Sabash question. I give him the data, he does the magic with it. So
I'm going to use
yeah. Yeah. All right. Any other questions?